Football at 4, John McMullen at JF McMullen on Twitter. Check him out there. And, of course, he, like all guests, appear via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. I think that we have a plethora of things we're going to hit on today, including some Tom Brady news, including a lot of stuff on the Eagles and Patrick Mahomes makes an appearance on today's Football at 4.
Mahomie.
The Mahomies. That's a good name for a charity, though. I like that.
It's a great name.
So let's get into it now on the Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN, the free mobile app, and bring John McMullen into our conversation. As a lot of sports leagues making some moves. We heard the NBA will have no fans in Golden State. The NCAA will have no fans in Dayton for the first 4. They'll have no fans in Cleveland for the first round. We heard the Seattle Mariners are now not going to be playing games in Seattle when they get home from spring training. And the XFL Seattle team, the Dragons, will not have fans in the stands on Saturday, John. And I asked you, I'll start with this, because how crippling could this potentially be to the future of that league, a game without fans in the stands?
Yeah, some people might joke it's that way anyway, but Seattle is one of the 2 biggest markets from a live event perspective. We talked a lot about how much they budgeted for losses, so now you're going to add on top of that. And I mentioned it yesterday on the show. This is where this kind of stuff could really, really cripple in industry and cripple a business, because this is a fledgling league and it's not entrenched by any stretch of imagination, that doesn't generate billions of dollars, that can't take that kind of hit. And that's where you are with this, they're panic. I don't know what other way to describe it. And I would like to make one correction when he said the NBA is making moves. These are government decisions by and large. These are not the decisions of the league. Seattle has banned anything with over 250 people. San Francisco's banned anything with over 1,000 people. So it's out of the league's hands in most of these instances, or in the case of the NCAA, certainly, as I mentioned, with the Dragons, 250. And, in a lot of ways, and I encourage people all the time, use common sense. Use common sense. It's a very valuable tool.
It's not common.
And think about, it is not. It's too rare. It's too uncommon. So it should be maybe labeled something new, because just take a look at Seattle versus San Francisco. These are governments making decisions. One says 250. One says 1,000. What the heck is the difference between 249 and 251? What is the difference between 999 and 1,001?
Well, the arbitrary numbers of, 5,000 people, it's like, why was it 5,000? I mean,
exactly. And people say, well, the experts say, well, too often government people are not experts. And even, use me as an example. Sometimes on the radio, I'm labeled an expert in sports. Well, I encourage you to use your common sense and think for yourself. Because ask your doctor. Because if you're allowed to go to the grocery store and you're allowed to go out to eat and you're allowed to go to a bar and have a drink, and you can do all these things, I think. I don't think they've been banned yet. And then they say, oh, by the way, you can't go to a sporting event because the local government says so. Is that going to save you?
Right. What would be the difference of sitting in a restaurant with 50 people and sitting into a sporting event with 100 people?
It's absurd, and the panic is absurd. And that's what contact your doctor, contact your primary care physician. They're going to tell you to wash your hands. They're going to tell you to be careful if you have some underlying issues. And if you are sick or you are aging, they're probably not going to tell you to go to the Flyers or Sixers game. But if you're young and you're healthy, they're going to say, yeah, Go to the game, enjoy yourself, wash your hands, take care of your hygiene.
So do you recommend that I fly on Tuesday?
Yes, I recommend you fly on Tuesday.
All right, I'm going back on.
Gil's going.
Unless you want to destroy the economy, which is going to do far worse things to you than the unlikely event you die from coronavirus.
John, my dad works up in Boston at the casino, and he said starting today, they're staying open, but any guest or anyone that's entering the casino, they're taking their temperature before they're allowed to enter.
I don't know what to say to that.
Is that an answer? should the Wells Fargo Center should be taking 20,000 fans' temperature? 101, little high. Sorry.
Yeah.
Turn around.
Yeah, and what about the people who fool their parents and stay home? What about Ferris Bueller? He's going to have
Ferris Bueller. Well, that's what I talked about, John, with refunding tickets. Because if you're saying, hey, we're going to play the game, but if you don't want to come because of the coronavirus worries, then we'll refund your ticket. But what if I bought the ticket in December and now I feel that the team's not good enough anymore and I just don't feel like going to the game because, Ben Simmons is out tonight?
Yeah, you got to tell the truth. You're not allowed to lie.
Right.
Yeah, there's so many issues, and as I said, these are government-driven issues. So you have that aspect. Well, if say to use the Sixers as an example, I mean, if they don't want to shut down and they're forced to shut down, are they going to be forced to hand back money to the fans who already bought those tickets? Well, you'd probably have to force them to do that as well, which the government could do at the end of the day, but it's creating more problems than it's solving. And I know Jeff Mosher, if he's listening, he loves when I say unintended consequences. You're seeing them all pop up. I mean, what Ryan just said about people, are people trained to take people's temperature at a casino?
Doubt it.
It's absurd.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how to take my own temperature. Sorry, I'm just kidding. Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN. Let's get into some football stuff because there is a lot going on. The NFL has awarded compensatory picks for the Eagles. 3 picks, a third and 2/4 for losing Nick Foles, Jordan Hicks, and Golden Tate. So they are going to get those extra picks like we all thought, but an extra third and 2/4. This is a big deal for a team that has not had a lot of draft choices the last couple of years.
Yeah, and that's the point. We all projected 10, and this is the reason the Eagles moved on from L.J. Fort and Andrew Sendejo before they were forced to cancel out one of those fourth-round picks. This is why they did those things. Probably could have used both of those players. Certainly L.J. Fort, when you see what happened with the linebacker position, and we've talked a lot about the coaching staff didn't want to cut Andrew Sendejo. So who knows, maybe would have helped them on the back end in the playoffs last year. But they were looking at the fact that there was an opportunity because of guys signing relatively big contracts. In the case of Nick Foles, certainly a massive contract, that they would get these compensatory picks. And when you have back-to-back years of 5 picks, all of a sudden 7 goes up to 10. So that's very important. I've talked about that a lot. This team needs to add bodies. They need to get younger. That's been Howie Roseman's almost credo since the beginning of the offseason. And that's what happens. When you have back-to-back years of 5, you need to add bodies, and that's where the Eagles are.
Also, interesting stuff when we look around. You tweeted this today. The most interesting part of the Eagles' offseason to you, John McMullen, will be how they rebuild the secondary and if Marquand Manuel, who is the new defensive backs coach, sees something different in younger players like Douglas, Jones, and Maddox. I think we forget that those guys are all signed and due to be back here and what kind of role they're going to have.
Yeah, and we've talked about that term "new eyes" for the offense a lot because that's what Jeffrey Lurie demanded. Was he wanted some outside perspective on the offense? Well, I think they're going to get it on the defense in the defensive backfield. For instance, Rashod Douglas and safety, you you've heard fans say forever, why don't they move him to safety? Why don't they move him to safety? The Eagles have never even looked at him at safety, never even given him practice rep at safety. But now you have Marquand Manuel has this history of turning corners into safeties. Maybe he comes in with a different perspective, and he looks at these guys and says, maybe he can fit in a different role. So I do think it's going to be interesting to see those new eyes on younger players that are going to be here, because even if they're not starters, obviously you need to put together almost an entire defensive backfield, because everybody's either a free agent or Malcolm Jenkins, in his case, basically comes down to March 18th. The Eagles have to pick up his option. He said he's not going to come back with his current contract. So they basically have to make that decision pretty early. Are they going to rework his deal? Are they going to figure that out? Or are they just going to let him become a free agent? So you could have 4 new starters in theory. I don't think you're going to, but it's going to look a lot different, and there's going to be some depth. So those guys are at least going to be here, maybe with the rare possibility of Sidney Jones being traded. If you can convince somebody he's still got some value, but I don't know if that's something that could happen. I think it's more likely you say, hey, we have a new defensive backs coach. Let's see what he can do with Sidney Jones.
I haven't asked you in a couple of weeks, John, just like an overall update on Malcolm Jenkins. Is there anything new there? Any opinion change for you, or what's the scuttlebutt there?
Well, just what I said. I mean,
Yeah.
They have to make the decision relatively quickly. It's not something that's going to linger into the summer. I think they're going to either decide, hey, we want Malcolm back, and something will be reworked, and his contract will be tweaked, maybe to give him guaranteed money for this year and next year. I think that's still the most likely scenario, because I don't think you want to go into any season, really, with 4 new starters. I certainly don't think Ronald Darby's going to be back, or Rodney McLeod. Jalen Mills, I think it's 50-50. So you could have a lot of turnover, and the last thing you don't want is to not have your leader back there. And I continue to think the Eagles will bring him back, if anything, just for some foundation. I mean, that's too much change.
John McMullen with us. Let's look at a couple possibilities. You mentioned safety. Rashod Jones released today by the Dolphins. Older, 32, doesn't sound like it makes sense. He ended up on the injury reserve, but he could play when he was at the top of his game. I don't know if at 32 he makes sense for this team.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there. I mean, this team wants to get younger. They already have a 32-year-old safety. They got to make a decision on who's got a history here. So you're not going to replace him with a 32-year-old safety from somewhere else who doesn't have a history here and is coming off injury. So you have really 2 strikes, because this team has had such a problem with injuries, at least the narrative. The last thing you want to do is bring in a bunch of guys coming off injury. And that's, Jones hasn't played a lot recently. Christian Kirksey is another player who hasn't played a lot recently at linebacker, so everyone got excited. I don't know if the Eagles want to go down that road because of all the questions it would generate.
Yeah, I was going to bring Kirksey up. He's, lined up a couple of visits apparently. 27 years old, was pretty good, but only 9 games in the last 2 years.
Yeah, age isn't a problem for him. So, I do think the Eagles should do the due diligence, because he is a good player when healthy. Problem is he hasn't been healthy, as you mentioned, really in 2 years. So I think that's the issue. That's the hurdle from Philadelphia's perspective. And if it was a different time where they haven't had all these issues, I think they would seriously discuss it if they could get him at a decent price. But because of those injuries, I think it's going to be difficult for this team at this time because of all those questions it would generate.
All right. Yesterday, free agent Robbie Anderson said he wants to go back to the Jets. He thinks there's mutual interest. It feels like his name has come up in trade talks the last 2 years for Philadelphia. We know Howie and Joe Douglas have a relationship, that they couldn't get a deal done. But Robbie Anderson, is he a guy that you think Howie would have his eye on if he hit the market?
I don't think so, only because he's going to get overpaid. There's not a lot of receivers on the projected to be on the open market from a free agency perspective. So he's going to get massively overpaid. And then on the back end of that, you have the draft and how deep it is at the wide receiver position. So I think it changes from there. The Eagles did have interest in him as a trade pickup. Certainly when they picked up Golden Tate, that was their first plan, was to trade for Robbie Anderson because they wanted more of a speed guy. Weren't able to get it done. They moved on to Golden Tate. Last year was more of a cursory thing, but they've certainly had interest, but they had interest under that rookie deal. They don't have interest at $12 million a year, and that's what NFL.com put out for Robbie Anderson.
Right.
If he gets $12 million, well, that's a hard pass. I don't know who's giving him that, but that's a mistake.
All right, a couple NFL stories that we will dive into here. One, these are interesting because Tampa Bay, Rick Stroud, very respected veteran reporter, reporting the Buccaneers are going all in on Tom Brady in free agency. I mean, that sounds like, hey, man, dive it in the deep end. Let's make this happen. Let's get weird. So we know Brady's being kind of connected to a bunch of teams. We've kind of talked about the Bucs, but can you see the Bucs going all in and succeeding?
Yeah, I don't know. It doesn't. I don't know. Maybe Bruce Arians wants somebody to hang out with closer to his age. I don't know. If you think about the type of coach Bruce Arians is, it's deep ball, deep ball, deep ball, and that's kind of the reason why people have looked at some of the other speculation. Teddy Bridgewater, for instance, a lot of people were hot and heavy on him. He's not a deep ball thrower. Tom at 43, he's not exactly Jim Plunkett throwing the ball down the field. So I don't know how that fits from Tampa Bay's perspective. I certainly don't know how it fits from Tom's perspective. I can't see that happening in a million years.
I like it, though. All in. Aaron Rappaport reporting the Titans are, quote, focused on re-signing Ryan Tannehill long-term. A lot of people putting Brady in Nashville. In fact, if you go to Vegas odds, Nashville is still, Tennessee, still at the top of the list there. So who more likely to be the quarterback in Tennessee, Brady or Tannehill?
Tannehill, no question. I think when you say those, I don't know. The odds I saw, obviously New England was first. I think it was 2-3. So that tells you New England still has the inside track on Tom Brady. And I think Tennessee was still second. Then the Chargers probably should be at this point for the reasons we discussed yesterday. But, yeah, I mean, I don't know why. Similar things I've said before. Why do you want to reboot at the quarterback position with a 43-year-old guy? Do you think you're on the cusp of the Super Bowl? In theory, Tennessee could. You have the history with New England, a general manager, and Mike Rabel was there as a player. So all of that makes sense, and I think that's where the speculation comes from. But, hey, Ryan Tannehill saved that team, saved that season. I don't know why they would want to start over with a 43-year-old. And I that's the same thing I keep defaulting to with every new team and Tom Brady.
All right, this one's interesting. Albert Breer from Sports Illustrated reporting Patrick Mahomes isn't going to do a deal just because the Chiefs want to. And a lot of this CBA, I'm imagining the new TV deal. So he's saying, I'll sign, but wait until there's more money out there for me.
Yeah, it's probably smart from his perspective. I mean, the cap is only going to continue to go up. It's a matter of how much. How much does the NFL increase its television deals? And if you look at the CBA, there's media kickers in for the revenue split, and one of them is 60%, and one of them is 120%. So that kind of tells you what the NFL's framework is for these new TV deals.
Right.
So worst case, they're expecting a 60% increase. Best case, they're expecting a 120% increase. And when you're talking about $7 and $8 billion, well, you can do the math. That's pretty significant money. So if I were Patrick Mahomes, I would wait as well.
Yeah, probably makes a lot of sense. And obviously, we are still waiting to get this CBA done, and the new league year is about to start. So there's a crunch coming up here right around Monday, right?
Yeah, it's going to be ugly.
Right.
It's going to be ugly.
Yeah. Coronavirus ugly,
Monday,
man.
Tuesday, Wednesday. Yeah, it is.
Use your common sense, NFL. Use your common sense.
Wash your hands, NFL.
Yes. Before we run, I would be remiss not to ask you about Rob Gronkowski, close to a deal with the WWE. That doesn't seem like much of a surprise, but do you anticipate and see him as an active in-ring performer?
Yeah, he's going to wrestle one match at least at SummerSlam, which is in Boston this year. And I think they're going to set it up at WrestleMania if WrestleMania goes off, obviously.
Which is in Tampa.
It's in Tampa. So, as I mentioned with the other leagues, WWE's not going to cancel it, but at some point the state of Florida might step in, or the city of Tampa might step in and say, you can't go on. But, yeah, Rob is signed, sealed, and delivered, and the goal is a match in Boston in August, SummerSlam.
Boston, very progressive in the coronavirus. They canceled the whole Ivy League tournament up there. So we'll see if you're allowed to go watch him wrestle at SummerSlam.
Well, we'll all be dead if this isn't over by August. So
All right. Thanks for the positivity.
Yeah.
Real quick, this is from a listener who just texted this in, and I think it's a pretty interesting question. John, do you feel many free agents are going to be, quote, overpaid this offseason, but in hindsight will be deals with the new CBA?
Yes and no. As I just explained with the Patrick Mahomes type, I think it will have more to do with players signing extensions because those, as I always point out, when you hit free agency, there's a reason you hit free agency, and it generally means you're a very good player, but you're not a great player. Because if you're a great player, there are too many mechanisms in play that enables your team to keep you. So if you get to the market, and Byron Jones is the perfect example of this, you're going to get overpaid. And that's where the expectations come in. And so by the time you're 2 years down the road, you're probably going to get cut. Now, that's what the history says. Not always, but the analytics suggest you're going to get cut. So I think it has more to do with extensions of true superstars like a Patrick Mahomes.
He's John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. And, of course, you can follow him on Twitter at JF McMullen. And he, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline for today's edition of Football at 4. Thanks, John.
Hey, thank you, guys.